I've been working on creating a portfolio optimized using the solver up here to the top right, solver, to get the optimal asset mix blend that will minimize the variance of the portfolio. In the previous videos, explain how we back into these values. And I just wanted to give a quick summary of what we're doing here before we get into the VBA. So here's solver. I am activating it so that it will give me the optimal portfolio mixes, the optimal investment in each one of these ticker symbols, each one of these stocks, that will give me a return of 1%. I can see that the highest I can get if I invest 100% of my money over the period I'm testing would be 42%. So let me come up here to return. Multiply this by 0 and ask it to give me a return of 40%. And I'm going to ask right now for an optimal portfolio blend here that will give me 40%. Let's see if it's even possible with the constraints. I do have some constraints when I set this up where I ask it to give me 2% in everything across the board. And the reason I do that is because when I act like a 2% minimum investment in everything. And the reason I do that is because I ask for a standard amount to be invested in everything. I'm not shorting any of the investments. If I want to change some of the stipulation here, all I need to do is click change. And I can adjust this to 0, so I can get rid of these steps, but I don't want to do that because I am running a macro, and I'll show you guys how I force investments basically to be a minimum of 2%. And that's a stipulation that I'm going to keep across the board on these stocks. So let me change this. Instead of 40, I'll ask it to give me a 35% return and calculate what is an optimal blend here of investments that will minimize the variance. Right now you can see I'm at 38% with a 10% variance. I'm going to ask it to give me a 35% return with the most minimized variance. So let's see what it generates. Okay, it was able to get us close. As you can see here, it got us to almost 35%. It minimized the variance to 8.1%. And here's our blend up here. And the solver has been set up to have a minimum 2% investment in everything. So nothing under 2%. And here's the optimal blend. 2 in Daimler, 5% invested in Lockheed Martin, Akamai at 23. Rolls-Royce, as you see, has a negative return, but I forced the solver to still give me an investment of 2%. Microsoft has the highest percentage allocation of investment, and then Hewlett-Packard. So if I sum up everything for these 6 shares, I get 100% basket mix. Now let me show you when I reset this, how I can run a macro that will do this over and over and over again and generate for me the minimum variance frontier. And then I'm going to have at least 4 portfolios. And again, the portfolios will be these baskets, these investments here. The solver will run through 420 iterations, and it will give me different blends, different basket of investments. And out of this, I'm going to be able to pick my optimal portfolios. My optimal investment blend. So right now, I'm doing one at a time, one at a time. Again, I'll show you. And here I've set it up where when it's running, these are incrementally. Let me get rid of this 35. These are increasing incrementally. Activate this back again. I'm asking it for a 2.1% return. Let's ask it for something higher. I'm gonna ask it for a 20% return. This is what drives the solver. And this is set to minimize the variance of the portfolio. So it's looking for the minimum variance at a given rate of return. So here I'm gonna solve it for a given rate of return of 20%. What's the minimum variance? Minimum variance is 6%, and here's my mix of investments. Now I'm gonna run this 420 times so that I can get my efficiency frontier. Reset everything. Activate. When I run the macro, this resets to 0, just so you can have an idea. And each time the solver runs, it increases the returns incrementally. You see up here? Each time it runs. And I'm gonna run it for 420 times. This is because I know my highest return, if I invest 100% of my funds, will be 42%. So at 42%, I'm expecting the variance of the portfolio to be 100% invested in that stock. So whatever that stock's variance is, that will be the variance of the portfolio. But because we're dealing with portfolio theory and the minimum variance frontier calculations with an asset blend, you can have at a given rate of return a minimized portfolio variance, and that's what we're seeking here. So let's see this in action. Reset these guys. And here we go. This is what we're trying to do here, is calculate our minimum variance portfolio for a given rate of return. So basically the highest Sharpe ratio. I'm gonna run solver. Actually, let me step into the macro. Here's our macro. This will run the solver 420 times. I'm gonna go over this macro in the next tutorial. This is just a quick overview. Run solver. And we're gonna give this about 5 minutes. So it's 4:50 right now. I'm expecting for it to be done at about 5 o'clock. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes. As you can see, let's clean this up too. Here we have 420 records. The solver ran 420 iterations, and it produced all of this data here, all of these acid blends, just to give you an idea. So the minimum investment I'm asking for it to make is 2%. So if it wants to make a 0% investment, for instance, these have a very high variance. So when it's trying to minimize the portfolio variance, it's trying not so much to allocate an investment in these shares. And the first shares were Daimler. These are very high in their risk of return. Although the return is quite high at 34%. The returns are all over the place. This increases the variance of the portfolio, the risk of the portfolio. So naturally, the system wants to invest 0% in something that's so risky. I'm making it invest a minimum of 2. Here you can see the percentages are changing. And it ran through this 420 times. And it changed the percentages of investments. And ultimately, it gave me approximately a 97% investment in our highest return stock, which was Microsoft, over this particular period, from January 2019 until almost April 1st, until March 30th. Looking at our chart, this is our efficiency curve. The way I have this set up, the portfolios with the highest Sharpe ratio here is the Sharpe, and I back into it simply by taking the returns over the standard deviation. This is a variance, so I'm taking the square root of the variance to the standard deviation, and whatever gives me the highest ratio, something equivalent to the Sharpe ratio, are the portfolios that I'm calling the most efficient. The most efficient portfolio is portfolio 313. It lands about here on the efficiency frontier. Here's my labels. It's in this location. With so much data, it's easier to read everything under the chart. What I could do is shift and right arrow all the way across. This seems to be the most efficient portfolio. Gonna go up here, copy and paste, and then take a look at my results. And I have a 31% return with a 7% portfolio variance. This is the most efficient portfolio. And just to give you an idea, if I am equally invested, so right now with this asset blend, I'm getting a 31% return, a 7% variance, thereabouts. Now let's say I'm equally invested in these 6 portfolios, in which case I would have done 1 divided by 6, or a 17% investment across the board in these, in these 6 investments in these 6 stocks. So the sum is 100%. Now if I go back to my portfolio variance and my portfolio return, if I equally invested in everything instead of a asset mix, I would have received a 16% return and a variance of 9%. So obviously, the previous portfolio, the one that's giving me a mix of 17% in Daimler, Lockheed 18, Akamai 28, Rolls-Royce a minimum of 2, and remember I was forcing this. Otherwise, the system would have probably calculated a 0% investment in Rolls-Royce, Microsoft 45, and Hewlett-Packard 5%. This is the optimal blend, and it will give me over the same period a 31% portfolio return with a 7% variance. That's what we're trying to do with our asset mixes. This is the goal of the course, so please continue watching it, like the videos if you get benefit out of it, and click the subscribe button. You can also find me via jazzfin.com and communicate with me that way. In the next video, we're going to take a look at this macro in more detail. This is what keeps the solver running over and over again. As long as it's populated properly, it will give us the optimal portfolio blend. And that's the power in Excel. Again, click the like, click the subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.